Today, we are going to cover notable food safety events throughout history. In 1898, the Association of Official Agriculture Chemists creates a Committee on Food Standards. In 1902, the Bureau of Chemistry begins to study chemical preservations and colors and how they affect digestion and health. In February of 1906, an author named Upton Sinclair wrote a fiction novel named The Jungle. This novel was focused around immigrants and their lives in cities at this time. Although it was fiction, it raised many concerns across the United States for food safety and sanitation. See, the novel was not all fiction. Sinclair spent a period of time as an employee in a meat packaging plant in Chicago to gain information for his novel. As a result, President Theodore Roosevelt passed the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Federal Meat Inspection Act in June of 1906, only 4 months after the book was published. These acts were focusing on truth in labeling as well as harmful food additives. During this time, preservatives such as formaldehyde and borax were being added to conceal unsanitary production conditions. Eventually, this would lead to the creation of the FDA and the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. The United States death tolls from food-related illnesses reportedly dropped significantly. In 1907, certified color regulations are made and list 7 colors found to be safe in the use of food. In 1913, the Gold Amendment is passed, requiring food packaging be plainly and conspicuously marked on the outside of the package in terms of weight, measure, or numerical count. In 1914, the first ruling against food additives is made in court. In the winter of 1924 to 1925, there was an incredible typhoid fever outbreak spread from improperly handled oysters. This gained national attention and is said to be the first foodborne illness outbreak to do so. In 1930, the McNary-Mapes Amendment is passed. The FDA is now authorized standards of quality and fill of container for canned foods, not including meat and milk products. In 1938, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is passed and includes authorization of standards of identity, quality, and fill of container foods, and also authorizes factory inspections. In 1938, the first food standards is issued, including some tomato products. In 1949, the Guidance to Industry is published by the FDA. It is titled Procedures for the Appraisal of the Toxicity of Chemicals in Food. It became known as the Black Book. In 1950, the Oleomargarine Act now requires proper labels to distinguish between oleomargarine and butter. Oleomargarine is now referred to as just margarine, although in many old recipes it is referred to as oleo. In 1950, the Delaney Committee begins a congressional investigation of the safety of chemicals in foods and cosmetics. In 1952, the FDA consumer consultants are appointed in each field to communicate and determine the needs and problems of consumers. In 1953, it is clarified that the FDA is required to give manufacturers reports in writing of conditions observed during inspection and the analysis of factory samples. In 1954, the very first large-scale radiology examination of food is conducted by the FDA when they received reports of tuna that was suspected to be radioactive coming in from Japan. In 1955, HEW Secretary Ovida Culp-Hobby creates a committee of 14 citizens to study the adequacy of the FDA's facilities and programs. A large expansion is recommended by this committee, and they also encourage more educational and informational programs. In 1958, Food Additives Amendment is enacted. Manufacturers of new food additives are now required to establish safety. In 1958, the Delaney Committee prohibits the approval of food additives that are shown to be carcinogens in humans or animals. In 1958, the Federal Register is also published, and it contains almost 200 substances that are GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. In 1959, the U.S. cranberry crop is recalled only 3 weeks prior to Thanksgiving. This was to test for aminotriazole, a weed killer and potential carcinogen. Cranberries that were safe included proper labeling stated that it was tested and determined to be safe. It was one of the very first times and only times that this type of labeling was required. In 1960, the Color Additive Amendment is enacted. Manufacturers are now required to establish safety of color additives. In 1966, the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act is passed, requiring labeling to be honest and informative. In 1969, the FDA creates sanitation programs focusing on shellfish, milk, and the food service industry. This year, the White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health also occurs and recommends systematic review of GRAS substances after the artificial sweetener cyclamate is banned. In 1970, the CDC begins to record foodborne illness deaths. In 1971, saccharin is removed from the GRAS list and is continued to be studied. In 1973, another illness outbreak occurs from canned mushrooms. A recall of over 75 million cans is made. This is the first large-scale food recall. The National Botulism Surveillance System was developed because of this outbreak, and low-acid foods processing regulations were made to ensure proper heat treating of canned foods. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is created by Congress and takes over many programs created by the FDA. In 1977, saccharin is back on shelves and stopped from being banned. However, it now requires to have proper labeling that it was found to be cancer-causing in lab animals. In 1982, the FDA publishes the Toxicology Principles for the Safety Assessment of Direct Food Additives and Color Additives Used in Food. This became known as the Red Book. In 1990, the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act now requires all packaged food to include nutrition labeling and all health claims for food to be consistent with terms defined by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Some health claims are now permitted and certain terms are regulated and standardized. The Saccharin Notice Act is also repealed. In 1997, the Clinton administration creates a food safety initiative. It costs $43 million. Because of this initiative, there is regulations created on seafood, meat processing, poultry processing, and shell eggs. A DNA fingerprinting system was also created to help track and determine the sources of outbreaks. It is now required for the CDC, FDA, USDA, and FoodNet to work together in responding to and detecting outbreaks. The Food and Drug Modernization Act reforms many acts, including increased measures to regulate food health claims. In 2002, following 9/11, the Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act is created to better prevent and respond to public health emergencies. Provisions are included to increase FDA regulations and control over imported and domestically produced commodities. In 2003, scientific criteria to ensure safe food is released by the National Academy of Sciences. This enhances the importance of the HACCP approach. In 2011, the Food Safety Modernization Act is signed into law. This focuses on the prevention of foodborne illness. This also gave the FDA more authority and is now able to regulate growing, harvesting, and processing methods. There are several notable court cases over this time period. In 1914, the first ruling on food additives, U.S. versus Lexington Mill and Elevator Company, it ruled that for bleached flour with nitrite residues to be banned, it had to be proven to be the cause of harm. It ruled that the presence of an ingredient is not enough to insinuate harm and to make it illegal. In 1924, the U.S. versus 95 barrels alleged apple cider vinegar. The Supreme Court rules that the Food and Drugs Act prohibits any statement, design, or any other item on a label that may mislead or deceive someone, even if it is technically true. In 1941, the U.S. versus Doddervike, it is determined that responsible officials of a corporation and the corporation itself can be prosecuted for violations even if they are unaware of them. In 1952, the U.S. versus Cardiff rules that the previously enacted factory inspection provision in the 1938 FTC Act is too vague to be enforced by criminal law. There is a lot of liability in foodborne illnesses. This includes strict product liability, where the distributor or seller of the product is selling a defect product, but they can be liable without proof or fault. This includes breach of implied warranty, where the product is found to not be reasonably suited for its intended use, or the defect resulted in injury to the consumer, and negligence. This is only used in some states and can be made if the defendant was proven to be mishandling contaminated food. There are also many possible defenses. The assumption of risk is where the defect is discovered by the consumer, however they continue to use the item. Contributory negligence, where the consumer was negligent and assisted in the creation of the defect. The product misuse, where the product was not handled properly by the consumer. Directions and warnings on labels, where the warnings and proper labels were utterly disregarded by the consumer. And the sealed container defense, which is also only used in some states. If the seller receives the product sealed and could not reasonably know or have caused the defect, they could also not be found liable.